Some gifts are so small that the world almost misses them until they change a life forever. The grand ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers as Chicago's wealthiest business leaders exchanged polished smiles, raised crystal glasses, and applauded another successful year of generosity. Every table displayed immaculate white roses. Every speech celebrated impressive donations, and every camera remained focused on the woman standing confidently beneath the spotlight. Victoria Hayes had become the face of American success, a billionaire CEO whose name represented innovation, influence, and determination. She thanked the audience with practiced grace, yet behind her composed smile rested a loneliness no headline had ever captured. A few feet away, almost invisible among the elegantly dressed guests, Ethan Brooks quietly adjusted the sleeve of his worn navy blazer while keeping one gentle eye on his 8-year-old daughter. He never belonged in rooms like this. He had only accepted an invitation because the neighborhood community center where he volunteered had received 2 complimentary seats from a generous donor. For Lily, the evening felt magical. She admired the sparkling lights, the orchestra playing soft holiday classics, and the enormous Christmas tree decorated with thousands of tiny white lights. In her small hands rested a neatly wrapped blue gift box that she had protected all evening as though it were the most valuable treasure in the world. Ethan leaned down with a patient smile. "Remember, sweetheart, gifts are about kindness, not attention." Lily nodded earnestly. "I know, Dad. And if you change your mind, that's okay too." She looked toward the stage where Victoria greeted another round of applause before whispering, "I think she needs it." Ethan followed her gaze, unsure what she meant, but before he could answer, Lily quietly slipped away through the crowd. Conversations continued for only another heartbeat before curiosity rippled across the ballroom. Guests noticed the little girl weaving carefully between expensive evening gowns and tailored tuxedos, holding the tiny blue box with both hands. Waiters paused in the middle of serving dinner. Photographers instinctively lowered their cameras, uncertain whether to capture the unexpected moment. Ethan felt his heart race as he hurried after his daughter, apologizing softly while moving past startled guests. Lily finally stopped directly in front of Victoria Hayes. The billionaire CEO looked down, surprised by the child standing there with bright, hopeful eyes. Without saying a word at first, Lily lifted the tiny blue box toward her. "This is for you," she said gently. The ballroom grew astonishingly quiet. Victoria blinked in confusion before kneeling so she could meet Lily at eye level. "For me?" she asked softly. Lily smiled with complete sincerity. "Dad says Christmas is hardest for people who smile the most." Ethan reached them at last, slightly out of breath and visibly embarrassed. "I'm so sorry," he began. She didn't mean to interrupt your evening. Victoria slowly accepted the tiny package instead of handing it back. For a brief second, the applause, conversations, and music faded into silence that seemed to stretch across the entire room. She looked from the small blue box to Ethan's apologetic expression, then back to Lily's innocent smile. Something almost imperceptible changed in her eyes, as though a memory had quietly awakened after remaining hidden for many years. No one in the ballroom could have known that the smallest gift of the evening had just become the only thing that truly mattered. Ethan barely slept after the gala, not because he regretted what had happened, but because he worried that Lily might have unknowingly embarrassed someone who had only shown kindness by accepting her gift. The next morning, long before the winter sun climbed above the Chicago skyline, he unlocked the front doors of the neighborhood community center with the same worn brass key he had carried for years. The old building greeted him with familiar creaks, the comforting scent of fresh coffee from the small kitchen, and colorful drawings taped along the hallway by children who believed every picture deserved a place on the wall. Lily hurried toward the art room, carrying her backpack almost as large as she was. "Good morning, Miss Carroll," she called cheerfully to the elderly volunteer arranging paintbrushes. "Good morning, sweetheart," the woman answered with a warm smile. "Did you have fun at the fancy party?" Lily grinned. "It was pretty, but I think she needed the present more than anybody else." Miss Carroll looked at Ethan with gentle curiosity, but he simply smiled and picked up a toolbox before beginning another ordinary day. A loose cabinet door needed repairing. 2 folding chairs had broken hinges. The basketball rack leaned slightly to one side. None of those jobs would ever appear in a newspaper. Yet Ethan completed each one with the same quiet care he would have given his own home. Whenever children arrived after school, he greeted every one of them by name. He helped a shy little boy tie his sneakers. He listened patiently as a young girl proudly read her favorite story aloud. He quietly replaced a torn page inside a donated picture book because he believed every child deserved books that looked loved instead of forgotten. Around lunchtime, another volunteer unfolded a newspaper on the reception desk. Splashed across one page was a photograph from the charity gala. Victoria Hayes stood holding the tiny blue gift box while Lily smiled up at her. Ethan immediately turned the newspaper face down. "We do not need attention," he said softly. "The center needs kindness, not headlines." The volunteers nodded because they knew him well. He had refused interviews before. He had politely declined awards from local organizations. Even when generous donors offered personal financial assistance, Ethan always redirected every dollar toward after-school programs, winter coats, books, or meals for neighborhood families. His life was measured by small victories that never appeared on social media. Late that afternoon, Lily sat beside him while coloring snowflakes with bright blue crayons. "Do you think she liked it?" she asked quietly. Ethan looked at his daughter before answering with complete honesty. "I think kindness never depends on whether someone says thank you. It matters because it reminds people they are not alone." Lily smiled, apparently satisfied with the answer, and continued drawing. Outside, light snow began drifting across the sidewalks while parents arrived to pick up their children. Inside, laughter echoed through the old building, filling every room with warmth that expensive architecture could never buy. Ethan locked the front door after the last family left, switched off the lights one by one, and walked home holding Lily's hand, completely unaware that across the city, the tiny blue gift box still rested unopened on Victoria Hayes' desk, waiting for a quiet moment that would change far more than either of them could possibly imagine. That evening, the top floor of Victoria Hayes' headquarters overlooked a sea of shimmering lights stretching across downtown Chicago. But for the first time in years, the breathtaking view failed to capture her attention. Her assistants had already gone home. The conference rooms stood empty, and the constant stream of phone calls had finally fallen silent. The tiny blue gift box remained exactly where she had placed it on the corner of her polished desk, untouched since the charity gala. Throughout the day, she had signed contracts worth millions of dollars, approved expansion plans, and spoken confidently during meetings, yet every quiet moment pulled her thoughts back to the little girl whose gentle smile carried none of the ambition, expectation, or calculation she encountered every day. She slowly walked toward the window before returning to the desk, as though something invisible kept drawing her back. Finally, with careful hands, she untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside rested a simple handmade friendship bracelet woven from blue, white, and silver thread beside a folded note written in careful childish handwriting. She unfolded the paper and read only one sentence. "My dad says everyone needs someone who remembers they matter." The words were uncomplicated, innocent, and entirely sincere. Victoria stared at the note without moving. Her fingers brushed lightly across the bracelet before a memory surfaced so unexpectedly that she closed her eyes. She was no longer standing inside a luxurious executive office. She was 9 years old again, sitting beside her father on the front steps of their modest suburban home, while he patiently braided colorful strings into a bracelet because she had been afraid to attend her first day at new school. He had smiled and placed it around her wrist before saying, "Whenever you think you are alone, remember that someone believes in you." She had worn that bracelet until the threads slowly unraveled. After his passing years later, success became her way of surviving grief. Awards replaced conversations. Meetings replaced family dinners. Headlines replaced quiet moments. Without realizing it, she had built a remarkable career while allowing loneliness to settle into the spaces that love once occupied. A single tear rolled down her cheek before she quietly laughed at herself. It had not been a board meeting, a financial victory, or another public honor that finally reached her heart. It had been a handmade bracelet from a little girl she had never met before the previous evening. Victoria carefully fastened the bracelet around her wrist. It was slightly too small, yet it fit well enough to remain there. She looked again at the note, then searched online for the neighborhood community center listed in the Gala program. Photographs appeared of smiling children, modest classrooms, aging furniture, and local volunteers. One image included Ethan Brooks repairing a bookshelf, while several children watched with admiration. There were no fundraising campaigns centered around him, no interviews celebrating his sacrifices, no personal appeals for sympathy. He seemed almost determined to remain unnoticed. Victoria leaned back in her chair and quietly whispered, "Who are you, Ethan Brooks?" Outside, snow continued drifting gently through the city, while inside the office she made no announcements, scheduled no press conference, and called no reporters. Instead, she opened her calendar, found a free afternoon later that week, and reserved the time for something she had not done in years. She planned to visit a place where success was measured not by profit, but by the number of lives quietly lifted through simple acts of kindness. 3 days later, a quiet snowfall covered the sidewalks surrounding the neighborhood community center, softening the sounds of the busy Chicago streets as parents hurried children inside to escape the cold. Ethan was replacing a loose window latch when he noticed an unfamiliar woman standing near the entrance wearing a simple camel-colored winter coat, dark scarf, knit gloves, and comfortable boots instead of the tailored business suits the entire city associated with Victoria Hayes. She carried no assistants, no photographers, and no security team. For the first time in many years, she had chosen to arrive somewhere without introducing herself. She stepped inside with a polite smile, taking in the colorful murals painted by neighborhood children, the shelves filled with donated books, and the joyful sound of laughter echoing through the aging building. Miss Carroll greeted her warmly. "Welcome. Are you here for the holiday volunteer program?" Victoria nodded with quiet sincerity. "If you have room for one more pair of hands." Within minutes, she found herself helping children decorate paper snowflakes, while Ethan repaired a wobbly craft table nearby. Neither of them mentioned the charity gala. Neither of them spoke about the blue gift box. Instead, their conversation began with ordinary things that somehow felt far more important. "This table has probably survived 3 generations of kindergarten art projects," Ethan said with a gentle laugh while tightening a loose screw. "Victoria smiled. Then it deserves a second chance." He looked up for a brief moment. "Most things do." Throughout the afternoon, Victoria quietly observed the rhythm of Ethan's life. Every child who entered the room greeted him with complete trust. Every volunteer naturally turned to him whenever something needed fixing, organizing, or encouraging. He never raised his voice. He never hurried anyone. When one little boy accidentally spilled a box of crayons across the floor and immediately apologized with tears in his eyes, Ethan simply knelt beside him. "Accidents happen," he said softly. "The important thing is that we help each other clean them up." Within seconds, half a dozen children joined in without being asked. Victoria watched the moment unfold with quiet amazement. She had spent years leading thousands of employees through strategic plans and executive meetings. Yet this father inspired cooperation with nothing more than patience and kindness. Later that afternoon, Lily recognized a visitor from the gala and ran over with bright excitement. "You came back." Victoria laughed gently. "I guess I did." Lily looked at the bracelet still resting around Victoria's wrist. "You kept it." Victoria touched the woven threads with unexpected tenderness. "It reminds me of something I forgot a long time ago." Lily smiled as though that answer made perfect sense before skipping away to join the other children. Ethan noticed the bracelet for the first time and quietly lowered his eyes, understanding that his daughter's gift had somehow become more meaningful than either of them had imagined. As the day came to an end, volunteers stacked chairs while families bundled into heavy winter coats for the walk home. Victoria helped sweep glitter from the craft room floor before gathering her scarf. Ethan walked her toward the entrance. "Thank you for volunteering today," he said sincerely. "The kids enjoyed having you here." Victoria looked around the modest building one last time before answering. "I think I received much more than I gave." They exchanged warm smiles without discussing wealth, business, or public recognition. Outside, snowflakes drifted peacefully beneath the streetlights as Victoria walked back toward her waiting car with slower steps than when she had arrived, carrying no gifts in her hands this time, yet feeling as though she had quietly discovered something infinitely more valuable than anything her remarkable career had ever placed inside her office. Over the following weeks, Victoria returned to the community center again and again, never announcing her visits and never allowing anyone from her company to accompany her. She left the executive office behind each afternoon she came, trading polished conference tables for folding chairs, designer presentations for children's artwork, and carefully rehearsed speeches for genuine conversations that required nothing except presence. Before long, the volunteers simply knew her as Victoria, the kind woman who never minded cleaning paintbrushes, serving hot chocolate, or helping children hang paper snowflakes along the hallways. Ethan noticed that she never tried to impress anyone. She arrived early, worked quietly, and stayed until every table had been folded away. One chilly Saturday morning, as they carried donated boxes into the storage room, Ethan smiled. "You are getting pretty good at this." Victoria laughed softly. "I had excellent teachers." He looked around the modest building with quiet satisfaction. This place has always been held together by people who care more than they are asked to. She nodded thoughtfully because she understood exactly what he meant. Before leaving that afternoon, she stood alone outside the aging building, studying the cracked sidewalk, the faded playground equipment, the leaking gutters, and the weathered wooden sign above the entrance. None of the problems were dramatic by themselves, yet together they silently revealed years of limited resources. The following Monday, without speaking to Ethan or revealing her intentions, Victoria invited the director of her family foundation into her office. She slid a folder across the table containing photographs she had taken herself. "No press release," she said calmly. "Not even cutting. No interviews. I want every dollar to reach the children." The director looked surprised. "Would you like the donation listed under your foundation?" Victoria gently shook her head. "List it as an anonymous community investment. The families do not need another headline. They need working classrooms." Within days, contractors quietly arrived after regular activities ended each evening. Old windows were replaced with energy-efficient glass. Fresh paint brightened every hallway. Broken shelves disappeared. New books filled the library. Safe playground equipment replaced structures that had served generations of children. A modern heating system ended the constant battle against winter drafts. Ethan stood inside the newly refreshed activity room one morning, looking around with disbelief. Miss Carroll smiled as volunteers unpacked boxes of art supplies. "Looks like somebody believes in miracles." Ethan slowly ran his hand across a brand new bookshelf before answering. "I think somebody believes in this neighborhood." Lily spun happily across the polished floor with several friends before stopping beside her father. "Do you think the person who helped us knows how many kids will smile here?" Ethan knelt beside her and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Sometimes the greatest kindness comes from people who never expect to be thanked." Across the room, Victoria quietly arranged children's books onto the new shelves, pretending not to hear their conversation. A warm smile touched her face as she slipped another colorful picture book into place. She finally understood something that years of extraordinary success had never taught her. Real generosity did not ask to be remembered. It simply created opportunities for others to build happier memories. As evening settled over Chicago and fresh snow reflected the glow of the streetlights outside, children filled the renovated rooms with laughter so bright that every wall seemed warmer than before, and in that joyful sound, both Ethan and Victoria discovered that kindness, when offered without expectation, always found a way to multiply far beyond the hands that first set it free. The annual holiday concert arrived beneath a sky filled with gently falling snow, and for the first time in many years, the neighborhood community center glowed with renewed warmth both inside and out. Families streamed through the front doors carrying homemade cookies, warm casseroles, and steaming cups of hot chocolate, while children hurried backstage with excited laughter echoing through the brightly decorated hallways. Fresh, evergreen garlands framed every doorway. White lights shimmered across the windows, and colorful ornaments crafted by the children themselves covered a towering Christmas tree standing proudly in the entrance. Ethan moved quietly from room to room, making certain every microphone worked, every chair stood straight, and every child felt ready before the performance began. He paused beside Lily as she nervously adjusted the ribbon in her hair. "Remember," he said with a reassuring smile, "people will not remember whether every note is perfect. They will remember how you made them feel." Lily took a deep breath and nodded. "I think I can do that." A few minutes later, Victoria entered through the front doors wearing a simple winter dress beneath a long cream-colored coat, her handmade bracelet still resting around her wrist exactly where she had promised herself it would remain. Many volunteers greeted her by name, no longer seeing a billionaire executive, but a friend who had quietly become part of their community. She found a seat near the front without ceremony, smiling warmly as children waved excitedly from behind the stage curtains. The lights dimmed, soft piano music filled the room, and one by one the children stepped onto the stage to sing familiar holiday songs that every family knew by heart. Parents quietly wiped away proud tears while grandparents reached for each other's hands. When Lily's group finished the final song, the audience responded with heartfelt applause that filled every corner of the room. As everyone prepared for the closing remarks, Lily unexpectedly walked back onto the stage, carrying a large folded piece of paper. Ethan looked surprised, but he recognized the determined expression on his daughter's face and simply trusted her heart. She stepped carefully down the small staircase and crossed the room until she stood before Victoria once again. "I made something else for you," she said softly. Victoria accepted the folded paper with gentle curiosity before opening it. Inside was a colorful drawing of 3 people standing hand in hand beneath bright Christmas lights outside the community center. Above them, written in careful childish letters, were the words, "Nobody has to feel alone anymore." Victoria stared at the picture as silence slowly settled across the room. Her fingers trembled slightly while tears filled her eyes before quietly slipping down her cheeks. She held the drawing against her heart, unable to speak for several long moments. No applause interrupted the silence. No one rushed to fill the quiet. Every person present instinctively understood that they were witnessing something far more meaningful than a holiday program. Ethan lowered his eyes with humble gratitude, realizing that his daughter had once again reached a heart that success alone never could. Victoria finally looked toward him, her voice barely above a whisper. "She has given me more than I could ever return." Ethan smiled gently before answering. Sometimes children remind adults of truths we accidentally leave behind. Around them, the softly glowing lights reflected against smiling faces while snow continued falling beyond the windows, and in that peaceful silence filled with grace, forgiveness, and quiet dignity, every person in the room understood that the greatest miracle of the season had never been wrapped in expensive paper, but had arrived through the open heart of a little girl who believed that every person deserved to know they mattered. In the days that followed the holiday concert, something remarkable began to happen. Not because anyone had planned it, but because genuine kindness has a quiet way of traveling farther than anyone expects. Parents shared photographs from the evening with relatives and friends. Volunteers spoke about the renovated community center during neighborhood gatherings. Local teachers mentioned the joyful performance to their classrooms. Before long, people across Chicago began visiting the center, each arriving with a different reason, but leaving with the same feeling that something special lived inside those familiar brick walls. Some brought boxes of books that had been collecting dust in their homes. Others donated winter coats, art supplies, musical instruments, or simply a few hours of their weekend to read stories, tutor children, or prepare warm meals for families. Ethan watched the growing movement with humble amazement. "It feels like the whole city suddenly remembered we are here," Miss Carroll said one afternoon as volunteers organized another unexpected delivery of children's books. Ethan smiled while helping unload the boxes. "People have always cared," he answered gently. "Sometimes they just need a reminder that one small act can become another." Across town, Victoria sat inside a board meeting listening to executives discuss quarterly reports and future investments. Yet her thoughts kept returning to the laughter inside the community center. Numbers still mattered. Responsibilities still mattered. But she no longer believed success could be measured only by financial growth. At the conclusion of the meeting, one executive suggested announcing the anonymous renovation project to improve the company's public image. Victoria quietly closed her notebook before responding. If people discover kindness because they see a headline, they may remember the company. If they discover kindness because they experience it themselves, they will remember one another. The room fell thoughtfully silent before the discussion moved in a different direction. Later that week, Victoria returned to the community center carrying several boxes of brand new children's novels. Lily ran to greet her with the joyful enthusiasm reserved for close friends. "You came back again." Victoria laughed warmly. "I think this place keeps inviting me." Ethan accepted the books with sincere gratitude. "The kids are going to love these." Victoria looked around the busy room where volunteers, parents, and children work side by side, decorating classrooms for the new year. "It is different every time I come," she observed. Ethan nodded. "That is because every person adds something only they can give." As the afternoon continued, a local television reporter stopped outside after hearing about the center's recent improvements. The volunteers politely thanked her for visiting, but Ethan quietly declined the interview. "The story is not about me," he said with his familiar calm smile. "If you would like to tell a story, tell people there are children here with dreams worth believing in." Standing a few steps away, Victoria heard every word. She understood that his humility was not an act of modesty. It was simply the way he chose to live. For years, she had searched for leaders capable of inspiring others. She finally realized the most extraordinary leader she had ever met wore a worn navy blazer, spent his afternoons repairing broken furniture, and measured every successful day by the number of smiles that left the building. As evening settled over the neighborhood, families walked home beneath softly glowing streetlights, while laughter still echoed inside the community center. And somewhere between those ordinary moments, an entire city quietly began learning that compassion was never multiplied through recognition, but through hearts willing to keep passing it forward without expecting anything in return. Winter slowly gave way to the first gentle signs of spring, and with every passing week the community center became more than a building where children gathered after school. It became a place where neighbors lingered longer, where strangers introduced themselves without hesitation, and where every familiar face seemed to carry a little more hope than before. Ethan noticed the changes not through grand announcements, but through ordinary moments that quietly accumulated into something extraordinary. Parents who had once hurried home now stayed to help clean classrooms. Teenagers returned on weekends to tutor younger children. Retired teachers volunteered to read stories every Thursday afternoon. The center had always belonged to the neighborhood, but now the neighborhood seemed determined to belong to one another. Victoria found herself looking forward to those afternoons more than any executive dinner or corporate celebration. She still led one of the nation's most successful companies with confidence and discipline, yet the balance in her life had quietly shifted. She no longer measured fulfillment by the number of meetings completed or projects approved. Instead, she smiled whenever Lily proudly showed her another drawing, whenever Ethan laughed with the volunteers while repairing something that had broken, or whenever she heard children filling the hallways with joyful conversations. One Saturday morning, after helping organize a family reading event, Victoria and Ethan sat together on a freshly restored wooden bench outside the center while children played nearby beneath bright blue skies. A soft breeze carried the scent of fresh grass through the neighborhood as birds returned to the trees after the long winter. For several peaceful moments, neither of them spoke. The silence felt comfortable rather than empty. Finally, Victoria looked toward the playground before quietly saying, "I spent years believing success meant reaching the highest place I could imagine. Now, I wonder if I was simply climbing farther away from the people who mattered most." Ethan rested his hands on his knees and smiled gently. Sometimes life gives us mountains to climb. Sometimes it gives us people worth walking beside instead. Victoria nodded slowly, her eyes following Lily as she helped a younger child gather scattered colored pencils without being asked. "She reminds me every day that kindness is learned by watching." Ethan looked toward his daughter with unmistakable pride. Children notice everything. They become what they see more often than what they hear. Victoria turned toward him with quiet gratitude. "Then she has had an incredible example." Ethan lowered his eyes with humble embarrassment before softly answering, "I have simply tried to become the father she deserves." Those words stayed with Victoria long after the conversation ended. She realized that Ethan had never tried to impress anyone, never tried to build a reputation, and never asked the world to recognize his sacrifices. His greatest accomplishment was not something displayed on a wall or printed in an annual report. It was visible in the compassionate heart of the little girl he was raising. As families gradually packed away folding chairs after the reading event, Lily walked over carrying 3 cups of lemonade. She handed one to her father, one to Victoria, and kept the last for herself before sitting happily between them on the bench. They talked about books, favorite spring flowers, and the upcoming summer programs with the easy comfort of people who no longer felt separated by titles or circumstances. Looking around at the children laughing across the playground, Victoria quietly understood that family is not always defined by the people who share our past. Sometimes it is formed by the people who gently help us discover a better future. And in that simple realization, all 3 of them shared the peaceful certainty that they had become an unexpected part of one another's journey, connected forever by the smallest gift that had quietly changed every heart it touched. Several months later, the community center stood as a quiet reminder that lasting change rarely begins with extraordinary plans. More often, it begins with one ordinary person choosing kindness when no one is expecting it. On a peaceful summer evening, the golden light of the setting sun stretched across the sidewalks of the neighborhood as children chased one another through the playground with carefree laughter that drifted into every corner of the building. Fresh flowers bloomed beside the entrance where faded weeds had once grown. The library shelves were filled with well-loved books, and every classroom carried the joyful energy of young minds discovering new possibilities. Ethan finished locking the storage room before stepping outside to watch Lily help a younger girl learn how to ride a small bicycle along the smooth sidewalk. She never laughed when the little girl lost her balance. She simply smiled, reached out her hand, and encouraged her to try again. Ethan watched quietly, recognizing the same compassion that had always lived inside his daughter. A familiar car slowly pulled into the parking lot, and Victoria stepped out carrying nothing except a reusable shopping bag filled with fresh lemonade and homemade cookies she had learned to bake from one of the neighborhood volunteers. She was no longer greeted with surprise when she arrived. Parents smiled and waved. Children hurried over to tell her about school projects and summer adventures. Volunteers naturally handed her small tasks without ceremony because she had become part of the community through consistency rather than status. Lily ran toward her with bright excitement before wrapping her arms around her waist. "You made it." Victoria laughed warmly. "I would not miss family night." Ethan heard those words and smiled without correcting them. Together, they carried folding tables onto the lawn while neighbors arranged a simple outdoor picnic beneath strings of white lights. There were no speeches, no cameras, and no reporters waiting to capture the evening. The moments that mattered, most rarely asked to be photographed. As twilight settled over the neighborhood, families shared homemade meals, children played music learned at the center, and grandparents told stories that made everyone laugh. Victoria quietly looked around at the gathering before turning toward Ethan. Do you ever think about how differently everything could have happened? Ethan considered the question for a moment before answering. Every day. But I also think about how one small choice can become the beginning of another person's hope. Victoria gently touched the handmade bracelet that still rested around her wrist after all those months. The colors had faded slightly from daily wear, yet she had never considered replacing it. It reminded her that the greatest treasures are not valuable because they are expensive. They are valuable because they carry love that cannot be measured. Lily reached into her backpack and carefully unfolded the same drawing she had given Victoria at the holiday concert. She had made a new copy for herself so she could keep one at home. Looking at the picture of three people standing together beneath bright lights, Ethan smiled quietly. No one spoke for several peaceful moments. The evening breeze carried the scent of fresh grass through the neighborhood, while the laughter of children filled the warm summer air. In that gentle silence, there was no longer a billionaire, no longer a struggling single father, and no longer a little girl who believed her gift was too small to matter. There were simply three grateful hearts connected by kindness, dignity, forgiveness, and second chances, proving that the world is not changed only by those with the greatest power, but by those willing to remind another human being that they are seen, they are valued, and they will never truly walk alone.